Hello, everyone. This is yet another episode of Career Talks by Welcome Solutions. And in these meetings, we talk with professionals who have interesting career paths and who are willing to share their life hacks with us. And today I have great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ruud Berkers. Ruud obtained his PhD at Radboud University Nijmegen and did a postdoc at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences in Leipzig, Germany. During his academic career, he also gained experience in teaching, science journalism, and science policy, along with science and clinical work. At some point during his postdoc, he decided to redirect course and quit his postdoc to work towards a career as a clinical psychologist. Today, he works as an early career psychologist at HSK, a mental health care institution with locations across the Netherlands. He uses cognitive behavioral techniques to treat a wide variety of conditions, including depression, anxiety, PTSD, and burnout. Thank you so much, Ruud, for accepting the invitation. I'm very curious to hear about your story, and please tell us how it all looked behind the scenes.
Yeah, thanks, Natalia. Thanks for inviting me to be on your channel. And yeah, I think there's some interesting things about my career that will be interesting to tell your audience about, because it's sort of, it looks one way from the outside when you look at LinkedIn profiles, but like behind the scenes is definitely not a straight line. And I always sort of admire or sort of envy people who have like one clear goal in mind and then do everything to work towards that goal, like a certain position that they want to attain or want to reach at a certain age. But I never had this. So my goal was always find the one thing or like the job that would sort of make me enthusiastic enough to get out of bed every morning. And I sort of had to discover along the way which careers worked and which didn't, like which kind of work and made me enthusiastic enough to get out of bed every morning and which didn't. And at the start, I sort of had the feeling that there were so many options and that there were so many things I could do that I, like, ideally, I would wanted to try them all. But that's not an option. So you have to narrow down at some point. But it's, and also at various points, you sort of have to redirect when there's things you discover that you don't like as much about the career you've chosen, and what are the things you do like, and what does it say about what other options to choose.
In Welcome Solutions, we help highly educated professionals with navigating towards their dream careers. We offer intensive career rotation courses combining self-discovery with practical information about the job market. We also work on our own educational materials such as books and self-navigation manuals. Our new tool, the Odyssey test, will help you discover what your natural way of creating value in the job market is and which working environment will fit you best. If you'd like to stay in touch with us and receive monthly updates, please subscribe to the newsletter.
Well, so this is in general the attitude I had towards choosing my career, and it sort of started to gain some direction during my bachelor's, when I did a course in psychology. And whereas before I sort of had this idea that psychology was something very vague, then I first learned that it's actually very scientific, methodological, and it also involves studying the brain. So studying the brain tells us about how people think and vice versa. And then I started to focus on like these two directions, sort of the biology side. How does the brain work? How do neurons work? And the other side, how does human cognition work? Without any further focus. And then later on, like I chose my master's program in that direction, because I was interested in those two things, psychology and biology. But I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. So I had these two fake ideas in mind based on sort of like role models, like lecturers that I would hear during my studies that are either from the clinic or from research. So I still wanted to not choose between those two. So I chose a master's program where I could do a clinical internship and a research internship. And then after finishing the master, I was really interested in doing both clinical work and research work. But I figured I was still very, very young, and I was not mature enough, or I didn't feel mature enough to be a clinician, right? I felt like I need to be more mature and have more life experience to be ready to be a therapist. Well, at least that was my thinking at the time. So I first pursued a PhD career. And I did research, and there I learned some things that I liked about research and some things I didn't like. And I was thinking I was in another crossroads after finishing my PhD. Do I want to go to the clinic? And I was actually leaning very much towards leaving science at that point and going to the clinic. But then sort of I came across the person who became my postdoc advisor, who I knew already from my master's internship. And we got talking about this very interesting postdoc project and he was wondering what I was interested in this. So at this point, I was like, do I make the switch now to go into the clinic? Or should I stay in science a bit longer and do this really interesting project? Which is more about episodic memory, future thinking, imagining the future, which is a kind of new grounds compared to my PhD. During my PhD, it was more about thinking about the past, knowledge about the past, memories about the past. And this postdoc was sort of extending it towards how do you imagine hypothetical scenarios that did not happen, but that could happen. So imagination. And that was fascinating enough for me that I chose to continue doing a postdoc. And at some point, while I sort of knew already in the back of my head that science wasn't going to be a very sustainable career option for me, and then like having reached my 30s, I was like, I know that I want to switch to being a clinician. Maybe now is the time to do this, because to make the switch, I still needed to do some additional courses and a traineeship, an internship to get the acceptable level of experience to enter the workforce as a therapist. So that's when I made the switch, and I quit my postdoc. I moved back from Germany to the Netherlands, and I started doing these courses and the internship. And it took me a little while, and then I finished those, and now I'm working full-time as a therapist. So that's sort of the rough trajectory. But at every step along the way, I always had like doubts about each option, right? And there was always these other things in the back of my head, like maybe science journalism is something I could do that I really liked. Maybe teaching. People always are in need of people to fill teaching jobs. So maybe that's a stable career option. And I like teaching as well. Maybe do something with science policy. So I dabbled a little bit in those things as well, which were valuable experiences. But so at the moment, I feel like I'm in a position where I could see myself working for the foreseeable future, growing, and there's growing and improving myself, but there's also some stability in sort of like what is required in the workforce. So that's good to know. While in the back of my head, I always have still the idea of at some point combining it with research, but not full-time research anymore.
Right. Actually, combining research with next career is not as easy. I was also thinking so that my bold plan was to lead my own company, and next to that still do interesting research projects on the side. But now I can see that, you know, once I started the company, it kind of absorbed me so much that there is never any time left to really occupy your brain with something intellectually challenging, because you're so you're so consumed by your work that at the end of the day there is just no energy left for challenges like producing new research
Yeah,
research results. So like
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
yeah.
I sort of share that realization that, you know, there's some people who do it really well, combine working in a clinic and doing research. And I had the idea of doing that. Like I had a dedicated research day at the end of the week, the Friday. But in practice, like Monday to Thursday are so busy, and I see so many patients that on Friday I'm just exhausted, and it's sort of hard to get around doing the science stuff. And it's sort of also lower priority for me now. So you really have to work and to make science a priority and to make the time to work on it.
So actually, referring to what you've said before, I can relate to this thought that I was also always I felt jealous towards people who discover early on what their craft is. And I also in my masters I had a few friends who, you know, there were these prodigies, and they came to a masters already as superstars, as winners of international competitions in physics and in mathematics, and they all already had this label, you know, this is the prodigy in this particular area. And they like, you know, their professors invested in them, and they were getting all the scholarships. And I was just a regular student, and I had to struggle during studies. And I was also like taking lots of subjects because I liked a lot of subjects, but I didn't really feel like I could excel to such an extent in each one of them. So I felt more like a jack of all trades. And at least like the public education system doesn't support such people too much, because all the scholarships are, you know, dedicated to students who have high grade, you know, good grades in one discipline. And but I have to say, on the other hand, that now when I talk to my friends, the same people who were so acknowledged 10 or 15 years ago, and many of them complain about it because they feel that their teachers and parents and all their environment spotted one particular talent in them and kind of pressed on them to go one way. And sometimes they ended up in some attractor, you know, in the job market that they are not even that happy about. So like I have a friend who was always you know, he was always like very apt in physics, and he was also winning competitions, and he became a physicist. He got his PhD with very good grades, and then got all the grants. But then at some point he walked away from physics. He was done, and he felt that he spent all his youth on what his parents and teachers wanted from him, just because he was a bit like a racehorse, you know. He was good at it, so people were betting on him to kind of keep on winning and keep on making results. And then he felt that he lost his whole youth on this. And I also think that many people who early discover the talents very early and kind of exploit those talents regret later on that they didn't try enough things and they didn't explore enough, and they were just you know, only going one direction. And they often walk away in their 30s as well, and they kind of start all over again. So I think on one hand, I mean, I share this feeling. I was also feeling lost on multiple occasions, and I felt there are so many things I would like to do, but I don't feel each one of, like, I cannot see where I can exploit all my talents at the same time. But at the same time, people who like develop slowly but systematically and like on many levels at the same time, and these late bloomers that kind of only come to the right conclusions after they reach 30 or even 40, usually they often end up in a happier place, just because they don't land in this like wrong attractor early on.
Yeah,
So
so I think it's good to not, for me it was good not to box myself in too much, and it was still sort of systematic in a way that I wanted to explore different things. So with that goal in mind, finding out what is the one thing that, you know, excited me enough to get out of bed every morning, I was quite systematic towards that goal. But if you say like, if I would have known from the start that this is what I wanted to do, I would have been much more efficient and maybe made different choices. But at the same time, looking back, would I've had doubts then as well, right? So one cannot know. I mean, it's very convenient if you are in a position where you want to be very early on and you're happy with that for the rest of your life. But it's not really in my nature to get into such a position and not question my life and whether I'm satisfied with it. So with my personality and my nature, I needed to do many different things and think at every step what I was gonna do next. It wouldn't have, yeah, it wouldn't have fit any other way, I think, for me.
right. Actually, I have a question since I met you in a graduate school, and I've seen that you were indeed engaged in a lot of different initiatives from the graduate school, like student council, through blogging for the institute blog, and all these different initiatives. And so you've put a lot of effort, not only in your publications, but also in your network, in your social life, in your safety net. So you basically, it looked like you were indeed building a career in science. And I even remember when you were leaving the city, you organized a goodbye party, like maybe 3 days in advance. And for those who don't live in the Netherlands, this is pretty much impossible to do. So in the Netherlands, if you invite someone for a party 3 days in advance, nobody will come, because people plan their time 3 months in advance, not 3 days in advance. So the fact that you had a full house was quite an achievement. That means that all these people really cared to be there, because otherwise, yeah, you would have, you would be sitting in an empty room. So,
Yeah,
so I can tell that you've built a lot of capital there, not only publication wise, but also network wise. So my question would be, um, did how did you deal with this ego problem, that once you step away from a career that you were building for so long and put so much effort into, and then you start anew, then you kind of lose all this like capital that you've built. Was it a problem for you? Like, did you have to take time to accept that, okay, now I have to start over in a new place, forget about everything that I've built, and start in a new environment? Or was it an easy decision?
it was actually quite an easy decision because, you know, I didn't feel like I lost all that I invested in, because I transferred to a field that is sort of adjacent, right? And I was hoping to be able to transfer some of the things that I learned to my new area of work. So in that sense, and what I know about the brain, what I learned from my research, my bona fides as a researcher, you know, in the clinic, they're always looking for researchers as well to be like scientist practitioners. So in that sense, I didn't feel like I lost capital, like but in the sense of, you know, my salary, and I had to take a step back because I started as an entry-level psychologist, and also in terms of my ability to get like prestigious grants or to have an impressive publication list. It was sort of a step that I took where I knew like I wasn't going to be able to compete with the top level cognitive neuroscientist. At the same time, it sort of gave me a peace of mind that I didn't have to compete, that I will be entering my own niche, sort of say, that I was way more excited about. So it wasn't really a difficult step in the end, because I knew like long term, it was going to be the right step for me. Short term, maybe like a step back in salary, and maybe not be as competitive anymore as the top scientist. But being able to go somewhere where I would be more happy with what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what your like feelings about it are, but my feeling is that it like that was also a surprise, but I my feeling is that editors of journals today, they don't care as much about your affiliation anymore, or at least yeah, that's the feeling I've got. Like in spring last year, we've published an opinion paper in Neuron, which is like one of like major um, scientific journals in neuroscience, and I was the first author on this publication, and my only affiliation is my company and my foundation. So I have absolutely no institutional affiliation in science, but the editors didn't really care about it. They just looked at the content, and perhaps also my collaborators helped, because there were some quite well-known names from good institutions there. So perhaps that mattered. But I felt that I was not treated any different just because I didn't have this academic affiliation. And
Right. Yeah, I think maybe for publishing, that is not such a huge problem, like your resume, and
mm,
but in order to get like future positions and grants, you know, it's a pyramid scheme, sort of, where, well, in the sense that at every next step you're taking, there's much less chances to continue, and it's still very much important how many publications you have and how many prestigious journals you have.
mhm.
Even though there's some movements to change this, but it's increasingly more competitive and dependent on your background and your CV.
Right. Yeah, we could talk for hours about this, right? I
Yes.
think it's quite a commonly well-known problem in academia, that it just became a frenzy, and yeah, and it's just like a bit like this like kids game, when you have like less and less chairs in every round, and then the music stops, and whoever doesn't sit on the chair is out of the game, and then like the only thing you're occupied with your mind is like how to find the next chair in the next round and make sure that you're not out of the game.
Yeah, and to be able to really compete, you have to um, be a lot more enthusiastic about, like, I'm very enthusiastic about science, but not to the extent that I want to do science every day. So I feel like, you know, there's other people who have that, who love looking at their scripts all day and optimizing analyses and think about that, but I don't. So I feel like I also don't, like I don't feel like I necessarily deserve also to proceed if I don't have this attitude. And some other people do have this attitude, where they're much more enthusiastic about doing science every day. So then I also have the attitude that I will like, okay, you can get these positions. I don't need to. I'll take a step back and, you know, do this other thing.
Well, it makes sense. Although, like when I think about it, I think that almost no one is creative every day, and it's
Yeah.
usually the case that you have good ideas and you have a flow maybe one day, and then for the next few days you do something more like algorithmic and bureaucratic, and just wrap up your conclusions, and then you have another like day when you have a real flow and good ideas come to your mind, and it's very uh, like almost no one has this systematic pattern of becoming, you know, of being a real scientist every day. I think most people are like this becomes a scientist once in a while, and then for the most of the time they are just office workers. And I felt like this as well. I felt there were just a scarce days when I was making some real progress, and then most of the time I was just reporting this progress or just cleaning my workplace in some ways, or yeah, just communicating. So it's almost nobody is like really a scientist in this job every day. um, so I don't think this is a matter of whether or not you deserve it, because definitely it's you deserve it. It's just more that probably it didn't indeed resonate with your like preferred lifestyle. That's how I understand it, and
Yeah, exactly.
perfectly fine. Yeah, okay. So can you tell us a bit more about how your working week looks right now? Because I think um, many PhD candidates have this feeling that they don't, you know, they don't meet the beneficiaries of their work often enough, or even never. I had that feeling that, you know, I came to neuroscience to with a hope that I will produce research that directly provides quality to the society in some ways, for instance by proposing new treatment methods, etc. And then I ended up with producing quite fundamental research that is quite detached, and it
Mhm.
probably most of it will never be applied anywhere. And that was one of the reasons why I left. And I think many like STEM PhDs in many disciplines are like have that thought at the end that they would like to have a job where they are closer to the beneficiary of their work. And I think what you do is a wonderful example of such a profession. So I think it would be very valuable if you tell us how your week looks, and you know, a little bit of insights into your daily practice. And also for those who are interested in this type of career, maybe you could tell a little bit about how much time and practice it takes to yeah, to reach this entry level where you can start working.
Yeah, so yeah, I can tell a little bit about my current schedule, how my week looks. So I work in basic mental health care, right? So like the first stage, when people are referred by their GP to get mm, to be referred for therapy for some sort of mental complaints. They're sort of referred to the place where I work first, right? So and then they start their treatments, which are like one appointment a week. So my my schedule looks my day looks very full with many appointments with patients, and also my day is much more dictated by a clearly defined schedule, right? So I have a certain amount of patients I see a day, usually 7, and then I have some time to do admin, to write reports on how things are going, um, and I have some time for because I'm entry level, I'm supervised, so I have supervision meetings where I talk about my skills as a therapist, like to reflect on the things that I'm doing. and on also like content-wise, what am I doing, or what sort of interventions am I using to treat patients in my caseload. So those are also part of my schedule. So that's a huge shift compared to science, where you have a lot of freedom to fill your own schedule, and I don't have this freedom now. So this is a disadvantage, but the advantage is that I'm much more efficient because I have a very clear schedule. And at the end of the day, like I get home and I truly have a feeling that I've done a lot. And this is a difference with science, where you have those days where you're like, what did I contribute today? What did I achieve today? In addition to some days that you feel like you truly achieved something. So those are like, part of the trade-off between the work that I do now and the work in science. Much more dictated by my schedule now, much less freedom and flexibility during the day. But I feel like truly at the end of the day, I've done a lot. And so this more close proximity to achieving benefits to people in their real life, that's one thing I truly like a lot. And this is even more so than I expected. Because at the place where we work, we like measure like the complaints in a sort of objective way with questionnaires. So not truly objective, but semi-objective way. And even more so than I expected, people make a lot of progress, most of them, in a very short time. And this is very gratifying to see that, I can do this and achieve this in people's life, that they feel much better because of the sessions that I have with them. And that's, and that's why, if you look at this trade-off and the pros and cons, the pros outweighs the cons.
You have like represent certain school with your therapy, like psychodynamic approach, or some other classic methodology. Like, I'm curious what your approach is.
Yeah, so we use cognitive behavioral therapy. So no psychodynamic therapy, no other forms of therapy like schema therapy, because we focus on more short-lasting therapies. And also that I feel that kind of therapies that work for the most complaints in the most short amount of time. And there's other therapies like schema therapy that are very interesting, and maybe at some point I would like to learn them, but they usually take much longer because you're treating more the personality, and we're treating the complaints with cognitive behavioral therapy. But within cognitive behavioral therapy, there's even a large variety of things you can do, like imaginary exposure with PTSD patients, panic disorders. You can do interoceptive exposure, and then combine that with cognitive therapy, where you sort of investigate certain assumptions or thoughts that people have. So that's the therapy that I'm using now, and it works quite well with most of the patients coming in within a relatively short period of time. And I feel like it's also, in a way, most closely aligned with the scientific method, right? Because you have, you're sort of testing, you're investigating their assumptions and their expectations, and you're sort of making them tested in real life and testing whether these assumptions are true with like behavioral experiments. You're testing certain outcomes that their behaviors may have. Or with cognitive therapy, you're sort of rationally and argumentatively testing their thought assumptions. So in a way, I feel like it's a therapy that fits me really well because it's very close to the scientific method.
Yeah, actually, I remember myself as an undergrad student in Warsaw. I was a patient to such a therapy, and I remember I was testing all the possible assumptions what factors influence my mood. In the end, I came to the conclusion that the most important factor is the amount of sunlight. So I bought like a lamp for spiders, and I installed it in my room, and I put it on 24/7, and it actually helped. So that was the outcome of my therapy, and then I never needed a psychologist again.
Yeah. I mean, it's very important. Like I often have people say like, oh, it's the weather's getting better, and I feel like that's why I feel better. And then you're like, okay, we did all these other things, and this is what you're attributing to your progress to. But sometimes it can be really something as simple as, you know, go outside more, get more sunlight.
Right. Well, in the end, we are very like simple organisms, I think.
Yeah.
It's also true that like people are very bad with finding real cause of their problems and finding real cause of their like mood as well. So they usually have.
Right. So this is why you sort of also go into therapy, right? It can be something that simple, but you just don't know, and you need somebody from like a third person perspective from the outside, sort of looking at your situation and systematically searching for the things you can change to make you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah, but like we like to, especially I think highly educated people, we like to develop a theory why some like certain events happen and why we feel the way we feel, and sometimes it's a matter of missing magnesium or some other element in the body and something completely different that has nothing to do with what we've said, what we've did, and what we've done. And like that's that I think, yeah, it's a fascinating topic to, yeah, to because you have to dig into every person separately, right, and like their story, and
Mm.
try to figure out what is the real what is the real problem. So it sounds like a very interesting job indeed. All right, so for those who would like to try, how much education do you need at the start? Because I know that before your PhD you also did already did study psychology and the clinical practice as well. I think so. Altogether, it's
Yes.
not as easy, right, to start.
Yeah. So in the Netherlands, to become like a psychotherapist, there's like a very large amount of different certificates that are needed at different stages of your career and that you can attain. Um, so if you want to work in a clinic as a psychologist and you know this from a very early stage onwards, then it helps to study psychology for your bachelor and master. Um, but because I was doing a more interdisciplinary study with also a focus on neuroscience and biology and like even molecular biology I studied at some point, I was also lacking some areas in my studies. So in the Netherlands, if you finish your university studies, you get this certificate, which is called the logo, which indicates that you've gained experience in a sufficient amount of domains, both in theory, like theoretical courses, as in practice during your internships. And I was lacking some credits basically to get this logo. So I started enrolled in another program at the Open University and started doing some courses remotely while I was doing my postdoc to get these additional credits.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story. But at some point, I also, because my last internship was too long ago, I did science for too long, I need to get some practical experience as well to get this logo. So I did another internship for half a year, which was really like returning to square one. But that allowed me to get sufficient experience to get this logo certificate. And then to enter this job. And from this job, there's like more certificates that you can get to get certified in different areas of therapy. GZ-opleiding is like the like one of the next steps where you become like board certified and you can truly work independently. So I can treat patients in the clinic, but I'm sort of always directly under supervision by a board certified psychologist who I discuss my caseload with.
Right. And how does career path look in your current job? So do you have like a next steps to take to become a senior practitioner? Can you tell us a bit about what is the next stage for you?
Yeah, so there's the GZ-opleiding, which I just mentioned. This 2-year studies where you become like board certified, where you can work independently, completely independently. The way it works is you get trained on the job, right? So you work and you get supervision at the clinic where you work, and 1 day a week you get coursework, additional lectures, assignments. And there's, in addition to the GZ-opleiding, which is sort of the most likely next step to take to become more senior, a more senior therapist, there's like specific trainings you can do to get certified in, for instance, cognitive behavioral therapy, or schema therapy, or there's various different types of therapy that are the most prevalent in the Netherlands where you can get certificates for. And these are also all on the job trainings, right? So you work and you use the technique, the method a lot, and then you have like intermittent supervision and educational days. But these are all like trainings on the job while you're working and getting an income, which is different than in some other countries where you basically don't get a salary and while you're getting these certificates.
Well, that's interesting. And if you let's say want to move abroad at some point, is your diploma then and your credentials, are they also rectified in a new place, or you have to, in a new country you have to go through the whole process again?
So that is very complicated, unfortunately. Each country has their own system of training their therapists and their own credentials. So they're not that easily transferred. I think there's some ways in which it can be done, but it's not very straightforward. Like I mentioned, Germany has a very different way of training their therapists. In the UK, it is again very different because there you do a clinical doctorate, where you also have to do research. And the Netherlands is much more like training on the job. So each country has a very different way of training their therapists, and also in different countries, there's sort of a different accent on different types of therapy. Like I think cognitive behavioral therapy is quite common and dominant in a lot of countries, but in some countries, the more psychodynamic therapies are much more common than in the Netherlands, where it's really not that commonly used.
I know a lot of people in Poland for some reason don't like the behavioral cognitive therapy, which surprises me. But Yeah, I can imagine that that might be
Yeah,
depend on the demands as well. So
yeah, I think the cognitive behavioral therapy, it's very practical and very, like focusing on what is going on at the moment. You're not really digging into somebody's past and their relationship to their mother and their father, even though they did contribute to the thought and behavioral patterns that you have now. But within cognitive behavioral therapy, you're not focusing on those kinds of things as much now. Um, you're focusing on the now. And many people feel like this is not going into depth enough to truly understand what is going on, but often it works quite well, right? So often it is enough to get people back on the right track. But yeah, there is in many areas like still this demand for this more in-depth, longer-lasting types of therapy like psychodynamic therapy. But those, those last years. So there's pros and cons for both of them.
right. Okay, so let me ask you a little bit more about your outlook on at your own career so far. And this is actually a question I often ask, and it is if you had the chance to do something differently in your career, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So if I'd known that I would end up where I am now, like working as a clinical therapist, uh, uh, I may have chosen some courses early on during my bachelor's and master's so that I would be able to get this logo thing, right? Because it was quite a pain during my postdoc and afterwards to get all the required certificates to get the logo. And in the Netherlands, it's also quite expensive to do courses in your bachelor's and master's after you've already finished your master's, right? So I would have, if I knew that this is where I was going to go, I would have done these courses during my bachelor and master the first time around. And make sure I got this logo certificate. But this is like a very boring point about this logo certificate. I think in the end, like there's not that much that I would have done differently because I'm quite proud of all the different things I got experience in. And I don't think I would have been more satisfied if I didn't do all these things. For instance, I lived in different countries like Australia and England and in Germany, which I was very happy with to get this experience. I got to do different things like science writing, teaching, that were also valuable. I took a year off between my bachelor's and my master to teach full time, which was also a valuable experience. So yeah, there's not much that I think I would have done differently. Maybe, yeah, just to get this certificate, made sure that I would fulfill all the requirements much more early on. No, but in the end, I'm quite satisfied.
That's great to hear. So from what I understand, you don't regret spending your time in Donda's graduate school, 4 years of your time there. Well, I mean, me neither. That's so I mean, I just wanted to know because some, like when I asked this question, some people tell me that they would have never went for a PhD in the first place, but I guess you're not one of these people, and you enjoy your time in the Donders, so that's great.
There's always like in hindsight, um, did the benefits that I got outweigh the cons? And I think they did. I learned a lot during my PhD, but also if I wouldn't have done this, like I wouldn't have had known how it is to do a PhD, and I would always wonder, you know, how that is like, and I maybe would have switched from the clinic to do a PhD later on in my career, right? So it's kind of a question like, I know that I would always, it's in my personality to think about these different things that I like and to want to try them out. And if I wouldn't have done a PhD, I later on would have regretted it and maybe done a PhD in my 40s, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking the same actually. That I was also wondering because I had those thoughts. You know, what would happen to me if I never did a PhD and I went to industry straight away? Probably I would be a different person right now and doing. Yeah, I have no idea what I would be doing right now. Um, but it's true that I would always have those thoughts. What if? Because as an undergrad, I was thinking about doing a PhD a lot, and most of my friends from studies did PhDs. So if I didn't, then I would probably have that thought in the back of my mind that once I'm done with my career and I'm financially free, then I probably will do a PhD anyways, just to
Yeah.
check how it is. So I get it. I feel the same that it was something that must have happened at some point. So yeah, indeed, yeah, I have the same the same attitude. All right. So lastly, is there any like general advice that you might give to the viewers of this channel, the people who yeah, who are wondering, pondering options in the job market and wondering if this is a good moment to switch careers and possibly thinking about working as a therapist?
The advice I would give is to think about what are the things that you like about science and what are the things you don't like about science, and what does that tell you about this next step. And for me, it was always my curiosity in human thinking, plus the contact with people, plus getting like achieving benefits in people's lives. Those were my three driving forces. And if you take those three together and wonder what that means and what that tells you about what you should do, then for me it pointed very clearly in this direction. Those are were the things that animated me about doing science, not so much spending days digging through my scripts or analyzing my data and fine-tuning experimental paradigms.
Mhm.
I noticed that I didn't like that as much, and I didn't have as much patience for this, but some people do really like that. And that tells you a different thing, that maybe you should be, if you want to leave science, that you should be in data science, right? And many people have done this. So they're informative, like how you experience your PhD and um, maybe a postdoc that you did informs you about the things that you could do next. And also ask yourself the question, in 10 years from now, do I see myself still doing this?
Mhm.
And the answer for me very clearly was no. I didn't really see a path where I would still be doing this 10 years and make a living out of it. So that also told me something.
Well, I have to say that sometimes to see clearly if you see yourself in a certain career path in 10 years, you have to step back for a while. Like I decided to take a gap year after my contract expired and just focus on doing whatever projects I found interesting for me. And my original plan was to rest from like exhausting PhD before I start a postdoc, and I didn't really think about leaving academia at that point. But when I stepped like away from academic community for a while, I started discovering that maybe there are also other ways of spending my time in the future that might be more yeah fulfilling for me. And that was the first time I even started doubting if career in science is what I really want. But it was only after a few months spent outside, and when I realized that there is a life outside academia. So if I didn't take this break and I just went on, for instance, because I met someone just like you, someone who was a good match and who had a good project at that point, then perhaps I would never even come to this conclusion. And so sometimes it's a matter of circumstance. You have to find this space also to take a perspective, and only then you can see that there are also other options. Because
Yeah,
of course they will tell you there are other options, but to really feel that there are other options, you have to sometimes just get out of the bubble for a while. So that's how it works for me.
exactly, and that's why what you're doing is quite good work, because in science the role models you have are people that have been successful in science and have only known doing science for their entire life, right? So you sort of are inside a bubble where it's sort of assumed that you will stay in science, where really, if you think about it, such a small percentage of us will still, of the people doing a PhD, will still be in science 10 years from now, that actually the default is you will be leaving science, right? But the way people interact who are in science, you get the feeling that the default is we're all going to stay in science
Yeah.
and be happy with it, where actually reality is much different, right? So I think it's important to indeed step out of this bubble and to talk to many different people who do different things, whether it's going into industry or the clinic like I'm doing, and to keep an open mind that the most likely scenario is you won't stay in science and you will do something else. So try to get an answer to that question. What is that other thing that you could see yourself doing?
Mhm. Well, you also mentioned that what drives you the most and drove you the most in your PhD was contact with people and the fact that you like interact with beneficiaries of your work. And that's what you found in your current career as a therapist. But actually, in science, so the default is that we are supposed to reach this goal by getting promoted, right? So many people also at some point feel that they no longer can find energy for, doing hands-on work on programming and fine-tuning models. But at this point, they are already so like senior that they have students, and the students are their hands to do the project, and they are more responsible for conceptual part of it and for supervising students, so for communicating with them. So I think many people also have that feeling that fine-tuning, for fine-tuning models and actually this like focused work by a computer is not their thing. But since they early in their careers they managed to get enough acknowledgement and enough personal success to get promoted to first like assistant professorships and such, then they can kind of leapfrog this problem and at some point become managers when they indeed mostly interact with people. So in academia it's kind of possible to also with that profile as you have to still do scientific work, but as you said it's just a matter of numbers, that there are too many
Yeah,
people who want the same thing. So you have competitive goals and
exactly. So if I would have been able to leapfrog these the grind of early science work, um, and go straight to professor with their own group and managing people and thinking about problems in a conceptual way, but then having other people do the actual work, programming, piloting, collecting data, analyzing, then I would love to do it. And I may have stayed in science, but unfortunately, it takes many years of, dedicated work, like where you're like zoomed in on such a small part of the things that you're interested in, that just didn't fit me as well.
Yeah.
And there's many people who it does fit with, which I find very impressive. You know, and they should definitely continue in science. But for me, it is this broader perspective that I needed to have. And actually, what I'm noticing now is also that actually the times that I do get to sit down and work on my science projects, I am much more excited about it and motivated about it now that I'm also having these other days in the clinic. You know, just being able to, and that tells me that that is something that works better for me. Being able to combine working on my tiny area of work with my science, and combine it with, you know, the different perspective that I get from the clinical work.
Right. Yeah, actually, I still have one more question, which is, since you, I can tell from this conversation that you did a lot of introspection during your PhD and throughout your career so far, and you analyzed yourself, like from different angles. And so my question would be, and you made your independent decisions, which is great, like based on your own conclusions.
Yeah.
So do you use some like self-discovery techniques? Is this just a free self-observation, or do you also, you know, did you also reached out for some self-development books, or some other materials, or maybe some practice or meditation or any other tool that might help you to you know, reach the right conclusions?
That's a very good question. Maybe I wasn't as focused on introspection at the time, but I always, you know, have a very broad perspective, where I consider many different potential outcomes for my career path. I do use mindfulness, and it sort of allows me to also zoom out and get a broader perspective, rather than staying within this science bubble. I do think this perspective that it's not that straightforward, that people in science will stay in science, that is not the default. That sort of allows me to keep this broader open mind and introspection, where I knew at each step, like, okay, I'm now doing science, but in 3 or 4 years I could be doing something completely different, and that allows you to look more critically at what you're doing.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Ruud, for being with us today and sharing your insights and sharing your career story. And yeah, I think it's a good lesson of how to ask yourself the right questions. And for you guys who would like to ask Ruud more questions about his practice and about his career, please reach out to him on LinkedIn. The link will be posted under the episode. And of course, if you enjoy this type of content, then please subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching. And till next time.
Thank you for having me.